I watched Luka play for like 3 years, and I think the guy was very happy to be in the NBA. NBA, okay? But I think he was intrigued because he was playing with his heroes. So I don't know if you remember at the All Star game, he started right in Chicago.
Right.
That was the first start, LeBron's team. And I remember he had an open dunk, and they said dunk, dunk. He was slow, and I'm playing with the guys, my heroes. And I think he enjoyed the game, but I don't think he had that dog in him yet. So fast forward, this January, I don't know if you recall, his second and third year, LeBron picked him first team. Remember the two captains?
Right.
This year, his fourth year, he was reserve. That was in the paper sometime around like January 11th. I think Luka got pissed. If you look at his stats before January 11th and after January 11th, they had a better record. His numbers were better, and he's played more like, he's got that dog in him.
What did you think about his last performance that he had?
Oh, no, great. I'm just saying, if you look at that, I think he was so happy his first 3 years just to be in the NBA. And I think now he realizes, he hasn't won a series yet. So hopefully he'll win a series against the Jazz and maybe another series. But I think he's beginning to realize, I got to win. The stats are good, but I've got to win. He enjoys the game. I think he's got a little dog and a little more fight in him now than he had before that.
The fact that he's 23
Mm-hmm.
and he's won in Euro Cup, he's won at the highest level in Europe. Now he's in the NBA playing at the highest level. That changes the culture of European basketball coming over here to let you know you could do your thing out here.
Right. But he's got to win.
He has to win.
Yeah, he's got the stats, but he's got to win. He can't be my generation was like Dominique Wilkins. Great dunks, great numbers, but Michael won the championships.
What was that era like for the young listeners that's listening? That Scottie Pippen era, the Michael Jordan era. I had Damian Wilkins as a teammate.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I was even going to say Bill Russell versus Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt Chamberlain had the numbers.
You watched that game?
And Russell had the championships. So when I think about, I guess that era, they played a little more physical. I think there was more hand checking and things like that. You didn't have the 3-point, which has moved the game out. I still think it's a lot of trash talk. It was trash talk back then. I don't know if you ever heard of Sam Jones. He was the guard with Bill Russell. He won 11 championships. I don't think people realize that. And I just flipped open his book, and they were talking some trash talk between him and Wilt Chamberlain. Sam Jones was about a 6'1" guard, maybe 6'2", and here's Chamberlain 7'1". So that's the thing I enjoy about basketball is the trash talk.
All right. That's, like I said, I'm a Draymond Green with better skill.
Okay.
I enjoy the grittiness. I enjoy getting in that person's face. And
Uh-huh.
the Pat Beverleys is like the 1%ers now in the league. They
Mhm.
don't make the Pat Bevs anymore.
Uh-huh.
But you mentioned the Jazz, right? And,
Yeah.
and you're in black ownership.
Right.
And Dwayne Wade,
Right.
as part
Right.
owner
Oh, yeah.
of the Jazz. How important is that to see Dwayne Wade in that position for the Jazz?
I think I heard a comment. It's called "Seize the Means of Production," and that was from a black philosopher in the early 1900s. So I think we've got to enjoy the American dream. We've got to have equity positions. The salaries are a lot higher now, even though I know the stakes are a lot higher. But that has to be the role model for young people to look at. Okay, this guy played basketball, but now what are the things that he's doing? What are the things beyond basketball, beyond entertainment, beyond sports that I can do, that Dwayne Wade is doing and others that are doing? So that to me is where we got to head.
How did you get started in business? Who influenced you to get into business and be successful at it?
I think I was always a good student. I really had to work at being an athlete, but I was always a slightly better student than I was as an athlete, and I consider myself a scholar athlete. A guy named Dr. Bell influenced me to go to Purdue because to me it was going to be either Purdue or Indiana University, and I wanted to go into engineering. My story was there was this new thing out called computers, and so I wanted to get an undergrad like EE, electrical engineering, and then a graduate degree in computer science, and I figured I could. That was my ticket.
Right.
Dr. Bell convinced me to go into the Craner Business School, which I did, and I ended up staying in business. So he steered me to Purdue and to business. Dr. Bell was a long-term principal counselor in Gary, Indiana, and he started a business opportunity program at Purdue University. So that taught me about business. And then once I got into business, I realized that from a political standpoint, um, you didn't have to be good. I saw guys who couldn't crunch numbers, but they were just very smooth. And it's kind of like President Reagan. They were called Teflon.
Okay.
Whatever they did, nothing stuck to them. So I saw then that I was going to have to make my own way. And I first started off, I was studying for CPA to start my own practice. And I filled out an application to become a McDonald's franchisee. It was rejected. And to me, where the athletic acumen comes in, I was like, man, they rejected me. You know, I have 2 degrees, um, dean's list, um, pretty good athlete. And so I decided to challenge that. And I was able to get into the program without filling out another application. And so some people call it, like as an athlete, seldom do you have an undefeated season. Seldom do you have an undefeated season. So as an athlete, you're used to winning, but when you lose, usually the next day, if you're in high school, you got a couple games a week. Pros, you got a couple games a week. Football, you got a game every week. You have to prepare to come back from a defeat. So that to me is what I learned in athletics. You get defeated, you prepare, and you come back and you compete again. So it's been a good run with McDonald's, but I still have my letter of rejection that's framed in my office.
How did that make you feel when you got rejected as a competitor that you are?
I had a pity party, Rico, for about 3 days, and then it's like the fight and the grit that you have. Even if it's one play in basketball, somebody dunks on you or they block your shot, then it's like, okay, you don't have a pity party. It's like as you go back down court, I'm gonna show them. And so it's like, hey, I didn't know anybody. This Fortune 500 company, and one of the guys I called was Dr. Bell, and he introduced me to some African Americans who were franchisees, and so I visited a guy named Mr. Henry in Indianapolis who had 6 restaurants. That was a lot of restaurants for a black franchisee back then. He introduced me to some guys who worked in corporate America for McDonald's. I visited those guys. Art Scott was one of them. And so with that, I began to network and build a network. I began to read books on McDonald's. So when I finally got an opportunity to speak to someone at McDonald's, I knew a little more about what to say. Can I talk about being humble?
Yes.
Okay, so I left Purdue University, had 2 degrees. And again, I made the dean's list 6 out of 8 semesters at Purdue. So I was a good student and had an MBA. And I worked for Exxon Corporation at that time, which was the largest corporation in the world. And so I was offered an opportunity after about 3 years to go to a place called Jackson, Mississippi, to run service stations. And I ran 15 service stations.
Wow.
But what I remember was in the training to run those service stations, I had to work the pump island. Back in those days when you pulled up to the pump, it was all full service. So a person came out and greeted you. And if any other listeners used to remember Andy of Mayberry, there was a guy named Barney Fife, his sidekick, who was a deputy sheriff. And so, you had a tie on and uniform. And so I was pumping gas even though I had a master's degree. But what turned out, I went from pumping gas, and this is Memphis, Tennessee, 3rd and Elvis Presley, 3rd Street in Elvis Presley, to run a service station in Lehigh, Arkansas, to run 15 service stations in Jackson, Mississippi. But that gave me, it was like really running a small business. I think back then those 15 service stations were doing about $15 million in dollars, but it was like real money. We collected the money. We had physical plants. We had restrooms. We had customers. We had complaints. We had physical plans to fix. And that's what gave me the background to what I ended up doing in McDonald's, because those are also profit centers. Those are physical plants that you have to maintain in addition to the employees and interacting with customers. So to me, by humbling myself and taking that opportunity to pump gas and then to run service stations in Jackson, Mississippi, was what was able, actually, in my interview with McDonald's, able to get me.
What year was that?
Oh man, I hate to say it.
Yeah.
I was in Mississippi in 1979. That was only 10 years after Dr. King. And so guys that reported to me were what we call Anglos. And so I was about 27. They were like 35 and 40. And believe it or not, Rico, that's where I learned that you could build a team in business. Because up until that point, when we talked about team, it was always athletics.
Right.
Okay? You were basketball, I was track. You build a team. Mine was like track and field, mainly individual events. But when you're in a relay, love to run a relay. Man, we got 4 guys. Come on, guys. Let's do it. Let's pass the stick. Let's beat the other team. And so when I picked up this territory in Mississippi, there used to be a TV show called F Troop. And it's like whatever could happen wrong, happened wrong. These guys had not earned a bonus. Nothing was getting fixed in the physical plants. So I came in just to do my job. And what happened was after about 4 months, these guys started making a bonus. So what I saw then was it wasn't black power, white power, it was green power. They started being able to bring money home and have a better life. We started winning like sales contests. And so they took me to the side and said, Roland, we can work for you. And I saw then, hey, you could build a team in business. Up until that point, I didn't think about it. It was always sports. And so I've carried that on to my team now. When I first was able to become a franchisee, from day one, I was like, I'm building an organization. It wasn't about restaurants. It was about restaurants. It was, I got to build a team. So right now, as a franchisee, and not every franchisee can do this, my maintenance team, if we had to build a McDonald's, we could build a McDonald's. Of the equipment that we have, we actually can do what's called warranty work. We can install equipment, whether it's digital, electrical, refrigeration. We can install it because we're certified to be installers and things like that. It just didn't happen. We had to build a team. And so at this point, I'm enjoying a team that we run a smooth operation.
As a leader, what do you look for in your team? What characteristics do you look for and say, like, hey, I want you part of my team?
Usually it ends up being longevity, but one of the key factors we looked at is if you can try to determine a person's attitude. And so a poor attitude will, it'll hurt the locker room. A poor attitude will hurt the locker room.
It's toxic.
Yeah, it is toxic. I hate to say it, but man, it's like we got to get the attitudes out. I like people that don't need a lot of supervision, good attitudes, hungry, a lot of energy. They want to work. And I try to find them. I tell you 2 quotes I just read about. One is from Teddy Roosevelt, who was president around 1890, 1900. And then the other one was from A-Rod, who used to be J-Lo's boyfriend. And they both said about the same thing, 100 years apart, because A-Rod is a great businessman. And basically they said you find the people, you train the people, and you get the hell out of the way and let them run the business. And the other thing I say is make sure you compensate them and reward them. I'm proud to say I've made a couple millionaires, and before I get out of business, I think I will have made about 5 or 6 millionaires.
How does that make you feel?
Hey, man, damn good. Can I say that?
Yeah. It's DeJuan Marrero podcast.
Yeah.
It's pretty unfiltered for the most part.
Uh-huh.
How did you deal with racism around that time when you were coming up in business? Or have you experienced racism? I should ask that.
Yeah, Rico, it's definite. I always say I'm a child of the civil rights movement, and I have a list of some comments people have made about me. It's like the top 5 where they describe me in like 3 words or less. And one of them described me as a diplomatic militant. So on racism, yes, I've experienced racism. I don't like to use it as a crutch. And a lot of times, I remember there was a guy, he used to tell me, Roland, they don't like you. And I presume because I'm successful. And I said to myself, well, I want them to really hate me. So I'm not going to say it a lot, but I'm going to try to do the best I can so they'll just hate me even more. So not sure that's a great answer on racism. I'd tell you a small story. There was a gentleman, his name is Hank Thomas. For those of your listeners, there's a famous picture of a bus in Anniston, Alabama, taken in the 1960s, late 1950s, of a burning Greyhound bus. It's a burning Greyhound bus, the Freedom Riders, where blacks and whites rode together in the South because blacks had to sit at the back of the bus. If you see some of those pictures, there's a guy standing, and you see the back of him. He's in a T-shirt. His name is Hank Thomas. And Hank Thomas was a franchisee, McDonald's franchisee. And if you read the book called Our Children by David Halberstam, he'll explain how At that time, when they threw the bomb on the bus, he didn't know if he was going to breathe the fumes and die or if he was going to walk out and get beat by the crowd. And so he did walk out, and I think they hit him across the nose, and he even has like he stutters or something because of that. But to this day, if I get on a rental car bus or any bus, I will not sit in the back. If it's full up front and all the empty seats are in the back, I'll stand up front. And that's to honor Hank Thomas. So there's little things that I do. I call for the civil rights movement, but I may not be out there with a fist and sunglasses yelling Black Power.
Right.
So, but diplomatic militant, I'm proud of that description.
How much money did you have to invest or put in to get your own franchise with McDonald's?
When I worked for Exxon, now this was back in the 80s, I had saved about $180,000, which a key to tell people, hey, you got to learn how to save. I think my father, he used to set out 75 cents on a Sunday morning, and 70 cents, okay, quarter in church, dime in Sunday school, a quarter went in the piggy bank, and then I had 10 cents for myself. So he taught me how to compartmentalize and save money. So I was able to save that with working for Exxon for 13 years back in the 70s and 80s. And so I used that to get in. If there's anybody listening right now, they want you to have, McDonald's wants you to have what they call unencumbered funds, about 750,000, something like that. And there's some programs they put in place where if you don't quite have that, but you have a lot of energy and you've been successful in business, you could get in. There's about 4 young men right now that I feel I'm their mentor, 2 in Dallas, 1 in California, 1 in Maryland that I'm mentoring to help them get into the McDonald's system. So, but those are the numbers from back then and the numbers from now.
What advice would you give young Black entrepreneurs currently trying to find their way in business?
One thing from a thought process standpoint, I've talked to many people who say, well, I want to, like a guy, I want to set up a storefront where you could buy black shoes. I said, why not set up a storefront that you can sell shoes to everybody? That's a point. Think broad. 2, make sure I feel you should understand finance and accounting. Now, the thing is, there's some people that could come up with a great idea. There's a guy named Robert Smith, who's in Austin, Texas, who's a billionaire. And I like to read his comments. And he says, with today's society, if you could come up with a great idea, say an app, you may not need to understand finance and accounting. You could take that idea. You don't need brick and mortar like my generation. So if you have this great idea, this is like point 3, then just get the right people to counsel you to get there. So I think savings, understanding accounting and finance, or having this bright idea that you can get ahead. Those are 3 components I would consider. And I talked about thinking broader, not just some finite marketplace that
Right.
you want to satisfy.
In business, like I'm learning so much about business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, having a small creative team with young creatives who are really good at video and whether that's photos, and we go out and do highlights for specific athletes.
Okay.
How do you handle challenges as in losses, or do you call those losses in business when things don't go your way in those business meetings?
Some of it is what I talked about. If you just have like a play on the basketball court, and you go back and you try to figure it out and see what you're going to do. I tell you one thing that we had. So we just came through the pandemic. So it was really scary for us in March of 2020. Sales were dropping. Employees didn't want to come to work. Customers weren't out. And we had to pivot. And what happened was we ended up becoming a drive-through restaurant. And to me, McDonald's was smart. They cut the menu, and we focused on that. I remember going out when we finally thought it was safe in April, and I was giving out hero pay for those people that worked. I mean, some of it was free money. Hey guys, here's checks, free money. Thank you for working, and try to pump up the team. So we had to adapt, and then we get to this January, February. Things are changing now. People are coming back out, but because of COVID, food costs are skyrocketing. So the problems that my managers faced for 2 years, they didn't have to think about. So it's like, okay, guys, come in. Look, things have changed. We talk about it. Hey, look, I didn't say we got to change right away, but look, in the next 2 months, we're going to have to focus back on food costs. We're going to have to focus on labor. It's different than it was the past 2 years. So to me, I have a team where we could sit down, we could talk about it, develop game plans, and go after it. So things are so dynamic. Things constantly change. I didn't realize the last department I worked in Exxon was called Innovations, and I didn't realize how much things change. So you always have to be adaptable. Um, Believe it or not, the team I was on in Innovations, there was not a magnetic stripe on a credit card. I was the numbers cruncher for that team, and it was like, okay, we got to add a magnetic stripe to a credit card. And but things constantly change. I mean, now you may not need credit cards; you could use your phone.
Right.
So you always have to have an eye for the future. When I talk to young people when I go to class, I show them a slide that has Montgomery Ward's, Howard Johnson's, and Sears. Sears was our Amazon. Um, and I tell them these brands are no longer with us. Pontiac is not with us. There's a couple other automobile brands. They're just not Oldsmobile. They're not with us. And so, I mean, there may come a day when Amazon is not with us, but right now it's Amazon, Netflix, Apple. And those are the companies that are with us. And so, what's going to happen next? So, you always have to have your eye on what is the future. What do we need in the future?
How important was like networking and relationships for you to get to where you are today?
Hey, I think about when I first started. I went to Dallas, Texas with one restaurant, and one of the tough social economic parts of town is called Pleasant Grove. In fact, comedians, if they joke about the Grove. So high crime, tough restaurant. But I grew up in Gary and in Hammond, and so I always think about it. Networking helped get me where I am. I'm on some pretty nice boards. The Methodist Hospital Board, the Dallas Mavericks have a advisory council, the Texas Rangers. But I started with one restaurant on the wrong side of town, and I was thinking the network first started with the black ministers and the teachers and the principals, and then it grew into knowing other people with SMU, the deans with SNU. I mean, now that took 20, 30 years. And so to me, I didn't realize, but I was constantly building the Parrish brand name in Texas. But it started within the community, just in the lobby. A lot of ministers, a city councilman. Um, there's individuals now who are thinking about running for mayor, and they want to have lunch with me. And 30 years ago, my father said I was a short order cook. I had a paper hat and an apron and a spatula. I was riding around with freezer gloves in my car, so when the truck came, I could unload the truck with my people. So it's been a good run, but I've tried to keep a good name with integrity and give back to the community.
You worked at McDonald's.
Never did.
Never did?
Yeah, people, if anybody, I know it's probably a national, international forecast. My brother, we lived near 165th in Columbia. There's a McDonald's there.
Yeah.
So my brother got a job there when they first opened, 1968. And I went across the street. There used to be a grocery store. It became Sturks, but it was Burgers back then, owned by the Burgers family. So my brother worked at McDonald's, and I worked at a grocery store called Burgers.
That's
But
awesome.
never worked at McDonald's.
That's awesome. Talk about Philanthropist and the philanthropy you did. And obviously, I saw you gave out a big chunk to Purdue.
Yeah.
They have a library named after you.
Right.
Why,
Right.
What made you want to do that?
Okay. Luke 12:48. To whom much is given, much is required. There's a book called "Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun" by Reginald Lewis. And if you haven't read it, you should read it. In fact, give me your address. I'll mail it to you.
Okay.
And Reginald Lewis at one time was the richest black man in America around the late 90s. He replaced John H. Johnson from Johnson Publishing Company. And there's a chapter in there where he talks about, at that time, he gave Harvard University, I think, $2 or $3 million. And at that time, it was the largest gift ever given to Harvard University. So that planted the seed about philanthropy along with the Bible. And I talked about my father, like, teaching us how to give to church. One other thing unique about Reginald Lewis, he got into Harvard Law School without filling out an application. It's worth reading the book about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
got
gonna
into
check
Harvard
that
Law
out.
School. Yeah. So I always had this dream and thought, and I actually wanted to do something with the athletic department. At Purdue, when I left, I had 4 individual records. I had 3 relay records. I had 6 Big Ten medals, but I didn't have a Big Ten championship. And I think because of that, and I didn't have an NCAA championship, I wanted to give some money to the athletic department to name something after me. And while I'm doing that, I met the president of the University of France, Cordova at that time, and she introduced me to the dean of libraries. And we ended up working a deal for the business school. And so I have the business school library named after me, which was the first major facility to be named after African American.
That's,
So between Reginald Lewis and the Bible, and by chance meeting with the president of the university, that happened.
to whom much is given, much is required.
Yeah.
What
Oh, I
high
got to throw one more. I got to throw.
Please.
Okay, so HBCUs, which have become pretty popular since George Floyd. So the Parrish Career Development Center is under construction at Fisk University in Nashville, and we should be open sometime this year, and that'll be the first building built on the Fisk campus in 50 years. So I'm a trustee at Fisk and very proud of that.
Would you gone to Fisk if you had to choose a HBCU?
I think at that time I probably would have considered Morehouse. Right behind me was a guy named Edwin Moses, who was a world record holder and run several Olympic championships. So I think back then, if it had been a black school, it probably would have been Morehouse.
For the new listeners and just hearing about you, and I was fascinated. What high school did you go to?
Oh, Hammond High School.
What year?
1971.
Why did you choose Purdue?
I was influenced by Dr. Bell. IU came late, and believe it or not, Nevada, Las Vegas courted late, and but Dr. Bell actually brought the head track coach. Purdue had sent some fillers out late my junior year. They had sent some fillers, assistant coaches, but the track coach came out. And I tell you something how Gary was back then. Everybody likes to talk about their athletic achievements. So sometimes the young guys will come up and they'll throw something. I mean, you weren't any good. And I just tell them, I say, look, in my event, I had 2 sectional championships and a sectional record. I had 2 regional championships that I won in Gary, at Gilroy Stadium and at Gary Westside, and I had the regional record. Most people from Hammond, when they went to Gary, they didn't perform. If you came to watch me run in Gary, I performed. 2 regional championships, regional records. And then my senior year, I won state, and I missed the state record by 3/10. So anyway, Purdue was already courting me and recruiting me, and IU called me after the state meet, but I had agreed after the regionals I was going to go to Purdue.
You think you would have got an NIL deal if you was at Purdue? How the rules are now?
I got approached with a job from the Cadillac dealership down there, not Frank Kendrick, but it was a Kendrick Cadillac, and he just saw a clean-cut guy. I was in my leather jacket, and I was actually headed to get my MBA, and I had on a jacket. He would offer me a job, so I'm not sure if it would have been NIL, but probably not in track and field. But I was clean-cut. I was offered some jobs.
What's your thoughts about pivoting now? What's your thoughts about the NIL and obviously collegiate athletes being compensated?
A lot of times, Rico, in life, I think like the pendulum swings. And so I do think that the NIL and the portal were necessary because a coach could recruit you, build a team, and then leave, and the athlete couldn't go anywhere. And we know that we're talking about the millions of dollars that the conferences make with their networks, and the athletes. I mean, I think the amount of money some of the athletes get was about the same amount of money I got when I lived in an apartment. And so I think it's a little out of control right now, but I think that it will be managed better as we get into the future. But I am all for the athletes making money and have an opportunity to leave school. I just think that it needs a little bit more management right now. Right. Oh, one thing, if anybody's listening that has an NIL agreement, make sure you plan for paying taxes because the money's not free.
How important is that, though, for obviously student athletes to learn about financial literacy because they think they're getting this bread, whereas hey man, you're gonna have to pay taxes on that.
Right.
The lucrative deal that's coming out the headlines, the clickbait, that's great. But at the end of the day, Uncle Sam's coming,
right,
knocking at the door.
Yeah, Michael Finley. I don't know if you remember him.
He was one of my favorite players.
Yeah. And we were happened to be on this same Zoom call with, and I think it was being recorded. And I was talking about how you should be conservative with your money, and he says when he talks to young players, he says, stash now so you could flash later. So we were saying the same thing, but in a different acumen. So I just hope that the athletic departments will tell the young men and women, hey, this is great, but let's plan for taxes. But no, I think it's great, the NIL and the
Do you believe in work-life balance? Have you been able to manage that in your life?
With my children, they tell me, Dad, don't worry about it. We have a quality relationship, but not quantity. And there's certain things. I mean, they graduated with no debt from college. They gone, they've had some pretty good foreign travel and been to some nice events in time. I mean, both my children have probably been to 4 or 5 Olympics. Um, but again, they're very independent and have been successful. So I think that I I do work a lot, but when we have fun, I think it's a great. Again, it's a quality relationship, not quantity. So,
Besides family, what's
uh-huh.
been one of your greatest achievements that you kind of reflect on and you're just proud of yourself?
I had a I had a how you have your parents' cousin. I had an older cousin at a family reunion say, "Hey, cuz, I'm so proud of you. Let's have breakfast tomorrow." So I'm thinking, wow, does he want to talk about business? Does he know my sports background way back in college? What he was going to talk to me about? And we sat down the next day at breakfast, and he said, "I'm proud of you." He says, "You've taken care of your parents." And first it was kind of like, I was like, I'm thinking sports, business. And I thought about it. And so the Bible says, honor thy mother and father that thy days may be longer on the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. I was able, by being successful, to, when my parents got in their later years, to bring them from Hammond, Indiana to Texas and take care of them for 4 and 5 years. I think it extended their lives. So when people ask me what's the thing that you're most proud of, I'll have to say it's being able to take care of my parents.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I hope I'm making that way now with my
Mm-hmm.
mom
Right.
raised in a single parent home,
Mm-hmm.
and you know the money I get, try to take care of her first,
Right.
and I
Mm-hmm.
try to tell like my teammates and up
Mm-hmm.
and coming athletes like, hey man, you gotta take care of your family first. Don't
Right.
give them all your dough.
Right.
Understand what they need and what's important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think it comes a point in time where some people feel I got to give my family all of my money.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with that. I
Right.
think in increments.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to say about that when that athlete feels like they just got to repay their parents everything?
Yeah, I think you have to use
Because don't you got to be selfish, would you say, at times with
what
your achievements?
well, I think in the beginning what I would tell them is, all right, make sure you use common sense, because what you want to do is hopefully you can build um, the dollars. So you got to save, you got to invest. Um, so you can't give everything away in the beginning. Um, when I first started, outside of my parents, most of my relatives, it was a no. And I'm building my business, and I'm trying to get there. And now I found out, I mean, since to me, I've been able to save and become financially stronger. There's sometimes I'll call a relative, especially during COVID, talk to them and say, hey, look, I'm going to send you FedEx. And I may send them some dollars, and they haven't asked for it. Some are ministers, and I think that they're true ministers, and they've sacrificed, and I've done that. But I think in the beginning you have to make sure that you're building up your position. And these athletes, I mean, I don't know what the average time in the NBA is. I think the NBA and NFL is typically 5 years or less.
Yeah, not
And
for
so,
long.
yeah, and so you're going to make a substantial amount of money, and you really need to make sure that you plan for taxes, that you plan for your future, and then help out. So I think if a guy gets a lucrative contract, get a nice home for the parents, and set it up where maybe they don't have to pay a note, they don't have to pay the mortgage, set something up for taxes, and then go back to trying to accumulate and dish out as you can. But now you gotta plan for the future.
What advice would you give your younger self? Last segment.
I always look at certain roads and journeys I wanted to take. When I was at Hammond High, I wanted to be an architect, and the counselor talked me out of that. Um, I wanted to be an engineer at Purdue, and Dr. Bell talked me out of that. Um, and I think it's been a good run since then. Um, I, Rico, I think I've had a pretty good journey. Um, there may be some things I don't want to mention on the air,
Oh, no
but
worries.
but I always would have been intrigued with either being an architect because of the construction boom in a lot of the major cities, and then the electrical engineering that I wanted and then to put that with a computer science with where we've gone with digital um, and the web and all those things. So I think about those. But I think with what I did, I came out okay. My classmates tell me I was a late bloomer. A lot of the girls say, "Well, you're a late bloomer." You know, I was a nerd, and so I might tell the young ladies out there, make sure that you date a nerd because they may blossom later.
Hey, it's almost like that one guy, like Tom Brady.
Yeah.
He was
Oh,
drafted last,
yeah.
and
Hmm.
look at him now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, I read a book on him recently. Actually, it was about the whole New England organization. And what I have a lot more respect for him now, and for Robert Kraft and the coach, is the fact that Brady basically lived in the stadium. I mean, almost from day one, um, and just honed his skills and honed his skills. And I said, you know what, this guy put in a lot of work. And myself, I know I put in 16-hour days, 7 days a week. Worked like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years before I had my first vacation. So that's something I respect. I know there's Brady haters out there, but the guy put in a lot of work. He put in a lot of work, and that'd be another point to make to young entrepreneurs. Hey, guys, you got a lot of work to do. You
What
got
are
to
the
work hard.
conversations like with millionaires? Are they any different than what you and I have, or what is their drive like?
um, I think a lot goes back to like a person's character and attitude, and so I prefer to be around people with good attitudes and character, even if they don't have a lot of money. Um, and so I don't know if that satisfies your
Yeah,
answer, but to me it ends up being, character, attitudes. What are the things that they do that have some of the similar interests that you have? Do they think about family as you have? Do they have respect for women that you have? So those are kind of things I do look at. Even though there's some guys that I'm around, it's like I know they have all those characters, and I know they're not going to ask me for anything
right.
because they're doing well. So I usually try to look at that, Rico, if I
I
can.
appreciate you sharing that. And like I
Yeah,
said, I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
yeah.
If you could name off some of your new business ventures that you have going on and reiterate what you got going on at Fisk,
Okay,
which is a historical black university
okay.
out in
So
Nashville.
yeah, a lot of times I have to write down what I have from a philanthropic standpoint. So we have okay, we got the Library of Purdue. Um, the Cranach Management Library is a parish library of management and economics. We haven't talked about the fact I have a clinic in Fort Portal, Uganda, that is named
Nice.
after my parents, the John and Marie Parrish Medical Clinic in Fort Portal. And in that clinic, it serves about 6,000 orphans a year, and they're orphans because their parents have died from HIV and AIDS. We have a Fisk Center that's being built and should be completed this year. The Parrish Career Development Center at Fisk University, and as I mentioned, they haven't had a building in 50 years. And I'm a trustee. We're going to have some other buildings if the Fisk guys are there. We're working with the government to build a new residence hall and a science building. And there's a project that I'm in Dallas. I'm the second largest investor. Um, there was a mall called the Redbird Mall, and obviously it went under. People typically don't go to malls, but we've reinvested and turned it into kind of like this multi-purpose area. And so we have two medical clinics. One is with Parkland Hospital, a $50,000 square foot clinic. The other is with UT Southwest Hospitals, which is 150,000 square feet. So we have 200,000 square feet of clinics that are in the community. So, and there was a hospital desert in southern Dallas. People would have to go outside of southern Dallas to seek medical attention. And so I'm really proud of that 200,000 square feet in a medical clinic in the community. So those are some projects I'm in that I really feel good about.
Social media. Promise I'm gonna let you go. I almost forgot to ask you. Have you been able to
Um,
navigate the social media space?
I can say that probably not. I probably give myself a C on that one. Um, Sometimes, Rico, you find you just have to hire people to do certain things.
Right.
And so I know that my website is lacking right now. So I got to get a good person that could keep the website up because there's some interesting things that I do. One thing I want to say for the Hammond folks in Northwest Indiana, this will be about my 12th year of giving scholarships. We give scholarships every year to seniors basically in the Hammond school system. And when I look at it, we're approaching about $200,000 that we've given back to the community in scholarships. And I have to say this, many of these young men and women are children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of men and women that I knew when I grew up. Most of them came from the South. They came from the South to go north so that they could get a better job and have a better educational opportunity for their children. So when some of the young people come up to me now and they say, well, my mother knew you or my grandmother knows you, and they tell me who they are. They said, my grandmother's over there, and I could go over and speak to them, and I'm helping their children get education. To me, that's the portal for the window of opportunity to live the American dream.
We're going to leave it at that.
Okay.
Mr. Roland Parrish, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Hey, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, Rico.
Thank you.
Did we hit 30 minutes or more?
Probably hit like 45 minutes.
Oh, yeah?
45 to 50 minutes.
I thought it was flowing pretty good. I should have sat up.
No, you look great.
Yeah.
We're good, Tony.
So we're good?
Yeah. Just get a photo.
Okay.
No,
right here?